The city of Santiago was quietly immersed in its usual routine as dusk approached. The sun began to hide behind the Andes, casting a golden and almost magical glow over the city. The shadows of the mountains provided a sense of security over the neighborhoods, where life went on without major disturbances. Vicente, a middle-aged man with an aura of calm, was on his balcony, watching the natural spectacle with a contemplative gaze. He had built a solid life with his wife, Clara, and their two daughters, Ana and Sofia. Their home was a charming building with red brick walls and a well-kept garden that bloomed with the arrival of spring. The garden was filled with colorful flowers that emitted a gentle fragrance, and Vicente's daughters played cheerfully while he watched. The sound of their laughter echoed down the quiet street, creating a perfect contrast with the beauty of the dusk. Clara, busy in the kitchen, prepared dinner with a sense of contentment, the table already set with the care of someone who cherishes life's small moments. But there was something different about that night. The sky, although still beautiful, seemed to have a slightly deeper hue, as if it were laden with a mystery that couldn't be deciphered. The clouds, instead of dispersing gently, formed irregular and unsettling patterns, as if nature itself were trying to communicate something. Vicente noticed an unexpected chill in the breeze, a shiver that didn't fit the generally mild weather of the season. He tried to dismiss the feeling, attributing it to a simple change in the weather, but he couldn't ignore a growing unease. The city, with its calm appearance, seemed to have an almost palpable undercurrent of tension. As the sun completely set, the twilight gave way to a darkness that seemed deeper and more impenetrable than usual. Vicente felt a weight on his chest, a sense that something was about to happen, a sort of premonition he couldn't clearly identify. He tried to push the thought away, focusing on family activities and his nightly routine. However, the persistent feeling did not disappear. The night began to close in on Santiago, and Vicente, unknowingly, was on the brink of a change that would challenge not only his peace but also the safety of his family. As he sat down at the table with his loved ones, the horizon seemed to hold secrets that would soon be revealed, turning that seemingly ordinary twilight into a prelude to chaos that was about to unfold. The tranquility of the night was on the verge of being shattered by events no one could have foreseen, and Vicente was at the center of this impending storm. The night that had started peacefully soon turned into a nightmare for Vicente and his family. The clock on the kitchen wall struck midnight when the first sign that something was wrong appeared. A deep roar, almost like distant thunder, echoed through the streets of Santiago. Vicente got up from the table, where remnants of dinner still lay, and went to the window to investigate. What he saw was unsettling. The sky, once clear and calm, was now covered with dense, turbulent clouds. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the city with frightening flashes of light. The storm seemed unprecedented, a force of nature that defied any explanation. The winds began to blow with relentless force, dragging objects through the streets and bending trees to their limits. The noise of the storm was deafening, a continuous roar that seemed to swallow the entire city. Vicente ran to his daughter's room, where he found Clara already trying to comfort them. The girls were terrified, their small bodies trembling as they tried to understand what was happening. Vicente held them tightly, trying to offer a comfort that seemed increasingly difficult to maintain. Clara looked at him with a deeply worried expression. "This has never happened before," she said, her voice trembling with fear. "I don't know what's happening." Vicente tried to stay calm, but the magnitude of the storm defied any attempt at rationalization. Water began to seep into the house through the windows and doors, flooding the floor and forcing the family to move to the upper floor. There, as they sought refuge from the chaos, the lightning illuminated the interior of the house with a ghostly glow, and the sound of waves crashing against the windows was almost unbearable. The storm continued to intensify, and Vicente noticed that something even more disturbing was happening. Among the lightning flashes, he saw shadows moving in the streets, figures that seemed to writhe and dance with the fury of the wind. There was a supernatural quality to the way the storm manifested, as if something was manipulating the elements to provoke chaos. As dawn approached, the storm finally began to subside. The fury of the winds and waters gradually lessened, leaving behind a scene of devastation that was almost inconceivable. Vicente, Clara, and their daughters, drenched and exhausted, looked at what remained of the city. The dawn brought a cold, indifferent light, revealing a landscape of destruction that defied comprehension. What had once been a familiar and safe environment was now unrecognizable, and Vicente knew that the storm had not been an isolated event. Something deeper and more sinister was at play, something lurking in the shadows of the storm that would soon come to light. The sun was trying to peek through the dense, dark clouds, but the city of Santiago was still shrouded in a fog of devastation. Vicente, Clara, and their daughters were among the few survivors who had managed to escape the storm's destruction. The house, though still standing, was full of damage, and the water that had flooded the lower floor was slowly draining. The scene outside was a field of destruction and chaos. The streets were covered in debris, fallen trees, and vehicles dragged around like toys. As they tried to assess the extent of the damage, Vicente noticed something peculiar. Among the rubble was an object that seemed out of place, a small wooden box, partially buried under a piece of collapsed roof. Curious, Vicente retrieved it from the debris and with some effort managed to open it. Inside, he found an old yellowed scroll and a rusty metal amulet. The amulet had strange symbols engraved on its surface, symbols that seemed oddly familiar, but Vicente couldn't identify them. The scroll, when unrolled, revealed a series of drawings and ancient texts that seemed to recount an old story about a curse haunting the city of Santiago. There were references to a lost ritual and a dark entity that, according to the legend, was dormant until awakened by catastrophic events. The legend spoke of a storm guardian, a primordial force that, if awakened, would bring disasters to the city. Vicente decided he needed to understand more about the origins of these objects and the legend they seemed to recount. With the scroll and amulet in hand, he sought the help of an academic friend, Jorge, who was an expert in local history and folklore. Jorge, upon examining the items, appeared visibly disturbed. "This is much more than just an old story," Jorge said, his voice trembling. "These symbols are associated with a very ancient legend, a curse that, according to local traditions, has the power to trigger extreme weather events. What we're seeing now might not be just a storm. It could be the manifestation of this curse." While Vicente and Jorge discussed the legend, Clara and the girls were trying to deal with the situation more practically, organizing supplies and trying to contact neighbors. The city was in a state of emergency, and news about the storm was spreading. However, Vicente's focus was increasingly on the connection between the scroll and the recent events. As the city began to clean up the damage, Vicente started noticing other disturbing signs. Strange clouds began forming in the sky, even as the weather seemed to calm. Unexplained weather phenomena started occurring with increasing frequency. Intense and sudden rains followed by stifling, abnormal heat, and even isolated lightning on seemingly clear days. These signs did not go unnoticed by Vicente. He and Jorge delved deeper into their research, scouring historical records and ancient accounts to better understand the curse and its possible effects. With each discovery, the connection between the scroll and the weather events became clearer, but also more unsettling. As the city struggled to return to normal and repair the damage caused by the storm, Vicente felt a growing sense of urgency. There was something terribly wrong, a force that seemed to be preparing for something even worse. The clues left by the storm signs and the scroll were like pieces of a dark puzzle slowly coming together. Vicente knew that the answer lay deep in history and in the true nature of the curse that now seemed to be unfolding before his eyes. The challenge was to decipher these signs before the city faced a new wave of terror. The sky, a canvas of gray and heavy clouds, seemed to reflect Santiago's growing unease. Vicente, now obsessed with the ancient legend mentioned in the scroll, was dedicating himself to investigating the dark history that seemed connected to the recent events. He spent hours in the city library, examining old records and folklore that might shed light on the mystery. It was during one of these research sessions that Vicente discovered an old, dusty leather-bound diary hidden among volumes on local history. The diary belonged to a 19th century historian named Manuel Morales, who had extensively written about the legends and mysteries of Santiago. Morales' meticulous handwriting detailed events and beliefs that had been nearly forgotten. Among the yellowed pages, Vicente found references to a mysterious figure known as the Storm Guardian. According to the diary, the Guardian was an ancient entity that, according to legends, controlled the elements and was responsible for devastating storms when its wrath was awakened. The entity was said to have been sealed by a complex ritual performed by a group of indigenous priests who sought to protect the city from its fury. Morales mentioned that for centuries, the city had lived under the shadow of the Guardian's threat. However, over time, the story became a mere legend, lost among mysteries and superstitions. Vicente realized that the catastrophic weather events that had ravaged the city could be linked to this ancient legend, which now seemed to have been activated. Meanwhile, Clara and the girls were trying to restore a sense of normalcy. They were helping with the cleanup and trying to keep hope alive, but there was a growing sense of anxiety in the air. Every sudden change in the weather was a constant reminder of the impending danger. Vicente began to explore the connection between the legend and the current events more deeply. He searched for ancient artifacts and visited historical sites associated with the Storm Guardian. During a visit to the old central market of Santiago, he found a series of inscriptions and symbols carved into a stone wall. These symbols matched those on the amulet found with the scroll and were linked to an ancient temple that had been destroyed long ago. The most disturbing revelation came when Vicente found a fragment of an inscription mentioning an interrupted appeasement ritual. The inscription detailed the need for a sacrifice to calm the Guardian's wrath and prevent further destruction. Vicente realized that the curse was not just a legend, but a cycle of events that needed to be resolved for the city to find peace. Vicente's search for answers led him to an old cave in the mountains surrounding Santiago, a location that, according to legends, was the Guardian's refuge. The cave was hidden and partially covered by vegetation, and the path to it was treacherous. When Vicente finally entered the cave, he found a series of ancient cave paintings and symbols depicting the Guardian and the sealing ritual. The images were frightening, showing an entity with a nearly incomprehensible destructive power. The echo of the legend reverberated off the cave walls, and Vicente felt an almost palpable presence, as if he were being watched. The feeling of being observed was so intense that he had to force himself to continue his exploration, despite the growing fear. The cave revealed a secret passage that led Vicente to a hidden chamber. In the center of the chamber was an ancient altar, covered in dust and spider webs. The altar was marked with the same symbols as the amulet and the scroll. Vicente realized he was standing at a crucial point in the curse's history, where the Guardian could be finally confronted or released. The discovery left Vicente with a sense of urgency and despair. He knew that the current events were not just a coincidence, but a sign that the Guardian was approaching the peak of its wrath. It was now clear that the legend was not just an old tale, but a warning of an impending disaster that he needed to prevent before it was too late. Vicente barely slept after his latest discovery. The weight of responsibility and the fear of what was to come hung over him like a constant shadow. The next morning, the sun appeared timidly, as if it too was hesitating before the prospect of further disasters. Santiago was beginning to recover from the storm's damage, but Vicente knew that the worst was yet to come. He decided he needed to find more information about the appeasement ritual mentioned in Manuel Morales' diary. The city was on high alert, with rescue teams working tirelessly and the chaos of the storm still fresh in everyone's memory. Vicente managed to locate some of the historical records mentioned, stored in an old municipal archive in a small local history library. Among the documents, he found a worn manuscript detailing the practice of a complex ritual involving the participation of a priest and community members. The ritual aimed to appease the Storm Guardian by offering a series of offerings and performing a specific ceremony to reseal the entity and prevent further destruction. According to the manuscript, the ceremony involved several meticulous steps: preparing a sacred circle, offering a symbolic sacrifice, and reciting ancient incantations. The most disturbing part was the mention of a key that needed to be placed on the altar, a key with mystical power necessary to complete the ritual. Vicente suspected that this key was the amulet he had found earlier. With renewed determination, Vicente headed to the location where the cave and the ancient altar were situated. He was aware that time was running out and that he needed to act quickly. The cave, now visible in clearer light, had an aura of desolation, and Vicente felt a shiver as he approached. When he arrived at the altar, he realized that something crucial was missing. The altar was empty and worn, but there were deep marks on the stones indicating that something had been placed there recently. The amulet Vicente had seemed to fit perfectly into the contours of the marks. He began preparing the sacred circle according to the manuscript's instructions, feeling a growing sense of urgency as storm clouds began to form in the sky again. The atmosphere in the cave was charged with unsettling energy. Vicente placed the amulet on the altar and started the incantation process. As he spoke the ancient words, the cave seemed to vibrate with an invisible force, and the sound of the incantations echoed off the rock walls. The wind howled outside, and Vicente could feel the guardian drawing nearer. Suddenly, a colossal thunderclap resonated, and a visible wave of energy seemed to emanate from the altar. The storm outside intensified, and lightning danced across the sky with renewed fury. Vicente felt the air growing heavier and harder to breathe, and the ground beneath him seemed to tremble. He continued with the ceremony, determined to complete the ritual despite the oppressive force trying to disrupt him. The incantations were starting to take effect, and the amulet began to glow with a pale, supernatural light. The guardian seemed to be resisting, struggling against the forces Vicente was trying to summon. The storm's energy reached an absolute climax, and Vicente had to use all his willpower to keep the ritual going. He felt the weight of history and expectations on his shoulders, and the desperation was becoming nearly unbearable. Each word he recited seemed like a scream amidst the chaos, a desperate attempt to keep the guardian under control. When he finally completed the last incantation, a surprising wave of calm swept through the cave. The storm outside began to slowly subside, and the amulet's light faded, indicating that the ritual had been completed. Vicente collapsed to the ground, exhausted but relieved. The guardian seemed to have been appeased, at least for now. As he got up, the cave began to regain its tranquility, and the sky above Santiago started to clear. Vicente knew that the battle against the curse was far from over, but at least for that moment, the storm had ceased, and the city had a chance to recover. The city of Santiago was in the midst of reconstruction after the devastating storm. The streets were still covered in debris, and the work to repair the damage seemed endless. Vicente, though exhausted, was determined to understand the true extent of the curse that had nearly destroyed the city. He became obsessed with uncovering the full origin of the force that had caused so much suffering. Based on the information he had gathered, Vicente began investigating an old mansion known as La Casa de Lluvia. Located on the outskirts of the city and known for its dark history, the mansion was mentioned in historical records as a focal point of the curse. It was said that centuries ago, it had been the center of occult activities and mysterious ceremonies linked to the Storm Guardian. La Casa de Lluvia was an imposing and sinister structure, with dark stone walls and broken windows that gave the impression of an abandoned and cursed place. Vicente decided he needed to explore the mansion to find more clues about the curse and its connection to the recent events. As he approached the mansion, Vicente felt an aura of unease. The atmosphere around the house was charged with dark energy, and the wind seemed to whisper ancient words. With a flashlight in hand, he entered the mansion, the door creaking with a deep and unsettling sound. The interior of the house was even more desolate. The air was heavy and stagnant, and the dust-covered floor seemed untouched for decades. Vicente moved cautiously through the hallways, his footsteps echoing off the silent walls. He passed through ruined rooms, with furniture covered in dust and faded tapestries swaying gently with the wind blowing through the broken windows. In the main room, Vicente found an old altar covered with a torn and dusty cloth. The altar was marked with the same symbols he had seen on the amulet and the scroll. It was clear that this place had been used for rituals, possibly related to the Storm Guardian. While examining the altar, Vicente noticed a hidden panel in the wall. With some effort, he managed to open it and discovered a secret chamber behind the wall. Inside, he found a series of ancient artifacts, books of sorcery, strange potions, and worn manuscripts. In the center of the chamber was a large, black leather-bound book with an inscription that read, "The Book of the Storm." Vicente opened the book carefully and began to read. The pages were filled with rituals and spells about controlling and manipulating storms. There were instructions for summoning the Guardian and also for resealing it. The language was complex, and the rituals described required precision and deep knowledge. As Vicente flipped through the book, he found a particularly disturbing chapter titled, "The Breaking of the Seal." The text described a method to weaken the seal that kept the Guardian trapped, a ritual involving specific ceremonies, and the collection of mystical items. Vicente realized that someone had somehow managed to break the seal and release the Guardian, triggering the catastrophic storm. The discovery left Vicente uneasy. It was clear that the curse was not just a natural event, but a force deliberately awakened by someone who understood the ancient rituals. He felt the growing pressure to find this person and prevent the curse from perpetuating. As he explored further in the mansion, Vicente found old documents mentioning a secret cult that had operated in the city for centuries, a group dedicated to worshiping and manipulating the Guardian. Members of this cult were known for performing sacrificial rituals and seeking power through their influence over natural forces. Vicente began to piece together the puzzle. The storm was not just a natural disaster, but the result of intentional manipulation of the curse. Someone was behind it all, someone who might still be in Santiago, possibly waiting to unleash another wave of chaos. With this new understanding, Vicente left the mansion with a renewed sense of urgency. He knew he needed to act quickly to protect the city and uncover the identity of the curse's manipulator. La Casa de la Lluvia, with its dark history and hidden secrets, had provided the essential clues, but now the real battle was just beginning. Santiago was on the brink of a new challenge, and Vicente was determined to face whatever lay ahead. Vicente knew that the discovery at La Casa de la Lluvia had revealed only the tip of the iceberg. The idea that a secret cult might be behind the release of the curse and the storms was alarming. Determined to protect his city and solve the mystery, Vicente began to investigate any leads that could lead him to those responsible. The first clue came from an old local legend that mentioned a group called the Lost Winds. According to the legend, this group was a cult that had been banished from the city centuries ago due to its occult practices and obsession with controlling natural forces. The cult aimed to worship and manipulate the Storm Guardian to gain power and influence. Vicente started looking for references to the Lost Winds in historical records and spoke with folklore experts. A local historian, who Vicente managed to interview, revealed crucial information. According to him, the cult had been destroyed after a major confrontation with the authorities of the time, but some rumors suggested that the few survivors had taken refuge in secret locations around the city. In one of the conversations, Vicente discovered records of old secret meetings and places of worship that had been destroyed, but some might still exist. A specific clue mentioned an old cemetery that had been turned into a public park, where the cult had performed its most important ceremonies. Vicente decided to visit the location. The cemetery, now a peaceful and well-maintained park, seemed to offer little at first glance. However, while exploring the less visible areas of the park, he found a hidden entrance covered by dense vegetation and almost invisible. The entrance led to a maze of underground tunnels that, according to historical records, had been used by the cult for its rituals. With a flashlight and an old map, Vicente descended into the tunnels, the air growing progressively colder and damper as he moved. The corridors were narrow and winding, and the walls were marked with strange, ancient symbols. Vicente recognized some of these symbols from the text he had studied, signs associated with the cult and the Guardian. As he navigated the tunnels, Vicente began to hear indistinct whispers, as if ancient voices were echoing through the walls. The sound seemed to intensify as he approached a large underground chamber. When he arrived in the chamber, he was met with a macabre scene. In the center of the room stood an altar similar to the one he had seen in the mansion. Surrounding it were various ritual artifacts and symbols of worship. What was most disturbing, however, was a group of people dressed in ancient ritualistic clothing. They were gathered around the altar, murmuring words in an unknown language. Vicente watched from hiding, feeling a mix of fear and determination. It appeared that the cult was still active and performing rituals, possibly trying to complete the task of unleashing the Guardian's fury once more. Vicente moved closer, discreetly, trying to hear more clearly. The words he managed to understand revealed a plan for a final ritual, an act that promised to unleash the full power of the Guardian once and for all, and bring a new era of chaos to Santiago. The people in the cult were clearly preparing something big and dangerous. With his heart racing, Vicente decided he needed to stop the ritual before it was too late. He knew the only way to do this was to confront the cult directly and halt the ritual at its crucial moment. Preparing for the confrontation, he signaled the city's rescue team, who had been informed about his search and were ready to assist. The moment to confront the cult arrived when Vicente, with the help of the rescue team, stormed the chamber. The battle was intense and chaotic. The cult members were armed and determined, but the combined effort of Vicente, and the rescuers was enough to disrupt the ritual and disarm the cultists. As the cult was contained, Vicente managed to approach the altar and, with a sense of relief mixed with exhaustion, did what he could to destroy the ritual artifacts and spellbooks found at the site. The atmosphere around began to calm, and the ancient whispers were silenced. The Guardian, which seemed to have been awakened again, was now being controlled, and the storm finally showed signs of subsiding. With the cult defeated and the ritual interrupted, Vicente felt a deep sense of relief, but also a sense that the battle was far from over. Santiago still had much to rebuild, and the Guardian might only be lying dormant, ready to re-emerge if the curse wasn't completely eradicated. Vicente's fight was far from finished, and he knew that the road to the city's recovery would be long and filled with challenges. With the cult dismantled and the ritual interrupted, Santiago seemed to breathe a temporary sigh of relief. The storms had started to subside, and the city began to rebuild from the scars left by the catastrophic events. Vicente, though exhausted, was determined to ensure the threat wouldn't return. Yet, a persistent unease lingered, a feeling that the battle was far from over. Even with the cult defeated, Vicente continued his investigation. He revisited the documents found in the cave and the mansion records, searching for any clue that might suggest the Guardian could still be at risk of awakening again. There was something in the texts and inscriptions that didn't quite fit, a sense that there was more behind the rituals and the cult than met the eye. Meanwhile, the sky over Santiago seemed to be slowly recovering, but there was still a palpable tension in the air. Vicente spent sleepless nights studying the ancient legend and mystical artifacts, eventually finding a reference to a crucial event, the spring equinox. The text mentioned that the Guardian had a special connection with seasonal changes, and that the entity's power could be amplified during these transitions, making them critical moments to keep the force dormant. Vicente realized that the spring equinox was rapidly approaching. He knew that if the curse wasn't completely resolved, the Guardian could awaken again and bring even greater chaos. Determined to prevent this, Vicente intensified his efforts to find the definitive solution. The night of the equinox arrived, and the city was on high alert. The atmosphere was charged with palpable tension, with dark clouds forming again in the sky. Vicente prepared for what could be the most dangerous moment of his struggle. With the amulet and the scroll in hand, he headed to the location where the cave and the ancient altar were situated, believing that this would be the key to sealing the Guardian once and for all. Upon arriving at the cave, Vicente encountered a disturbing sight. The altar was intact, and a strange energy emanated from it. The surrounding stones were covered in a layer of ice, and the environment seemed frozen in a state of anticipation. Vicente knew that something was about to happen. He prepared to perform the final ritual, based on the instructions from the ancient book and the knowledge he had gained throughout his investigation. As Vicente began to prepare the sacred circle, the clouds above started to stir, and the wind began to howl with increasing force. The storm that had diminished was returning with alarming intensity. Vicente started reciting the incantations, his voice struggling to be heard above the roar of the storm. As he progressed with the ritual, he felt a powerful and threatening presence. The Guardian was approaching, and the energy in the cave was becoming almost unbearable. Lightning illuminated the sky, and thunder echoed off the cave walls. Vicente struggled against the invisible force that seemed to try to thwart the ritual. Amidst the chaos, Vicente saw a shadowy and imposing figure materializing at the center of the altar. The Guardian, in its colossal and threatening form, was fully manifesting, its presence radiating a destructive energy. Vicente continued with the incantations, his determination growing as the figure of the Guardian became more solid and menacing. With one final effort, Vicente placed the amulet on the altar and completed the ritual. The light from the amulet shone brightly, creating a force field around the altar that seemed to contain the Guardian's energy. The storm in the sky began to calm, and the figure of the Guardian started to disintegrate, being absorbed by the amulet's brilliant light. As the ritual drew to a close, Vicente felt a wave of relief seeing that the Guardian was being sealed again. The threatening presence began to fade, and the storm finally ceased, leaving a clear and peaceful sky. Exhausted but satisfied, Vicente collapsed to the ground. The battle had been tough and perilous, but he had managed to protect Santiago and prevent a greater disaster. The city was in the process of recovery, and Vicente knew that the threat of the Guardian was temporarily averted. As he looked at the clear sky, Vicente felt a mix of relief and sadness. The city had been saved, but the cost of the fight had been high. With the Guardian sealed once more, Vicente prepared to face the future, knowing that peace was fragile and continuous vigilance would be necessary to protect the city from the dark forces that might still threaten Santiago. The city of Santiago was finally beginning to recover from the chaos left by the storm. Sunlight shone on the buildings and streets, now under reconstruction. The fear and devastation that had overtaken the city were slowly giving way to hope and rebuilding. For Vicente, however, the victory felt bittersweet, a constant reminder of the price he had paid to protect the city. Vicente, with the help of Clara and the daughters, was involved in cleaning up the damage and recovering lost belongings. He had become a local hero, but the true battle had left deep marks on his life. The physical and emotional scars were evident, and the fight against the Guardian and the cult had left a sense of emptiness and exhaustion. As he helped restore the city, Vicente discovered a new concern. The old records and documents he had studied mentioned a potential consequence of the ritual, a shift in natural balances, and a possible continuation of the Guardian's influence, even if it was sealed. There were rumors that the curse might not be completely eradicated, and that traces of its influence could still remain. Determined to ensure lasting peace, Vicente decided to investigate these concerns further. He sought out experts in supernatural phenomena and consulted leading local historians. Together, they began a series of analyses and investigations to check for any residual energy or signs that the Guardian might still be active, even in a weakened form. During this process, Vicente faced a painful reality. The cost of the battle against the Guardian had deeply affected not just the city, but also his own life. Clara and the daughters were trying to move on, but the tension and trauma from recent events had left visible scars on their family. Fear and uncertainty loomed over them, and a sense of normalcy seemed elusive. As Vicente worked tirelessly to restore the city, he started to feel the pressure of balancing his own life with his responsibilities. Stress and exhaustion began to take a toll on his health, and he struggled to find moments of peace and normalcy amidst the ongoing recovery. On the other hand, the city was making significant progress. The community was united, and the citizens' determination was helping them overcome challenges. The reconstruction of damaged areas was underway, and there was a growing sense of hope and resilience. However, Vicente still grappled with doubt and fear that the threat might not have been fully eliminated. In his investigations, he encountered some anomalies that couldn't be easily explained. Strange weather events and unexplained disturbances occurred, suggesting that the curse might still be subtly influencing the city. With the help of experts, Vicente developed a plan to constantly monitor for any signs of residual Guardian influence. Equipped with new detection devices and techniques, he established a surveillance network to ensure that any manifestation of supernatural power would be detected and addressed immediately. While working on this monitoring plan, Vicente also began to reconnect with his family and focus on his own recovery. He realized that despite the high price of victory, it was crucial to find a balance between his responsibilities and his own well-being. With Clara and the daughter's support, Vicente started to rebuild his personal life and find a new purpose. Santiago was slowly recovering, and Vicente, despite his scars and exhaustion, found a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Although the battle against the Guardian had been grueling and the personal cost high, the community's determination and resilience helped restore the city and face any future threats with renewed courage. The end of the storm brought a new beginning for Vicente and Santiago. The city was back on track, and the Guardian, while temporarily sealed, remained a constant reminder of the fragility of peace. Vicente knew that the fight to protect the city was far from over, but he was prepared to face whatever came next with the strength and determination that had guided him thus far. As Santiago continued to rebuild and days passed with a semblance of normalcy, Vicente was far from resting. The city seemed to have found a precarious balance, but something still troubled the protagonist's mind. The feeling that the battle against the curse was not entirely one haunted him constantly. Over time, Vicente decided to investigate one last clue he had overlooked in the rush to face the crisis. During a detailed review of the historical records and artifacts he had found, Vicente noticed an obscure reference to a secret of the Guardian that seemed to have been forgotten. This secret was hidden between the lines of ancient texts and forgotten passages, and appeared to be the key to understanding the true nature of the entity he had faced. Determined to solve the mystery, Vicente sought out experts in mythology and occultism who could offer more insights into what might be concealed. With the help of a renowned professor of ancient history and experienced occultist, he delved into in-depth research that revealed darker and more complex details about the Storm Guardian. What Vicente discovered was both surprising and disturbing. The Guardian was not merely an entity controlling storms, but a being that had been imprisoned and manipulated by older and more powerful forces over the centuries. The curse affecting Santiago was rooted in an ancient dispute between gods and primordial entities vying for control of the natural elements balance. The secret of the Guardian, as revealed by the texts and studies, was that the entity was part of an eternal cycle of rise and fall, a pawn in a cosmic game of power. The ritual Vicente had performed had temporarily sealed the Guardian, but the real secret was understanding that the entity was just one of many tools in a larger battle unfolding in the shadows of reality. Vicente realized that the fight was not just against the Guardian, but against a primordial force behind the manipulation of storms and the curse. The entity had been a pawn in a larger game, and the true challenge was to prevent the greater force controlling the Guardian from finding a new way to act. To confront this new threat, Vicente had to prepare for a different level of confrontation. He began assembling a team of experts in mythology and ancient magic, forming a group of researchers and practitioners who could help him face the true source of the curse. Together, they developed a plan to create a new, more powerful and complex ritual that aimed not only to seal the Guardian again, but also to weaken the primordial force that had manipulated it. The ritual required collaboration across several disciplines and the use of ancient artifacts, including the very amulet Vicente had found and other powerful items. With the help of his new allies, Vicente prepared the site for the final ritual, choosing a place of significant spiritual and energetic meaning. The night of the ritual arrived, and the city was once again in a state of vigilance and anticipation. The sky was filled with clouds, and a storm threatened to form. Vicente and his team were ready to confront the primordial force and attempt, once and for all, to break the cycle of manipulation and control. During the ritual, the surrounding energy seemed to intensify, and the presence of the primordial force became palpable. Vicente and his team battled the invisible forces trying to thwart the ritual's success, and the struggle was intense and challenging. Every incantation and gesture was crucial to ensuring the ritual's success. As the ritual reached its climax, an explosion of light and energy enveloped the site, and the presence of the primordial force began to weaken. Vicente felt a wave of relief and accomplishment as he realized that the cycle was finally being broken. The storm in the sky started to dissipate, and the dark energy was replaced by a sense of peace. The secret of the Guardian had been revealed and confronted, and Santiago was finally free from the direct influence of the primordial force. The city was ready for a new beginning, with the understanding that the fight against hidden forces and ancient curses was an inevitable part of history and ongoing protection of humanity. Vicente, though exhausted and marked by his experiences, found a new purpose in his role as a guardian and protector. Victory had been achieved, but ongoing vigilance and knowledge were essential to ensuring that the natural balance was maintained and peace endured. Santiago was ready to face the future with renewed hope and strength, while Vicente continued his journey as a defender against the forces that threatened the world.